Good morning, everybody. You're all very welcome to this WIMS Live webinar on no stigma in the community. We've a great panel of contributors lined up for you this morning, and I think we're in for a really interesting chat. Now, I'll introduce you to our panelists now. So we're joined by Advocacy Manager at St. Patrick's Mental Health Services, Louise O'Leary, Sea Change Ambassador, James O'Connor, and Coordinator of Shelbourne Football Club's education programmes, Jason Mcginnis. Now, hi guys, good morning everybody. We'll have time for questions at the end, so if you have something you'd like to ask, please just use that little Q&A box on Zoom to send it in, and we'll go through as many of them as we can. We'd love to get your questions because obviously we could chat all morning, but it's interesting to know what it is you want to know about, and then we can get through those questions. So first of all, stigma is one of those things that I think, we all kind of consider ourselves to have a wee bit of an understanding of, but it's no harm to begin this morning by discussing it in a little bit more detail, just so that we're all clear about what we're talking about. So to do that, I'm going to ask Louise O'Leary to join me now for a chat about this just a little bit further. So Louise, we'll kick off by, I'll ask you what sounds like a fairly basic question, but it's a good jumping off point. What is stigma? Like, how would you define stigma in your work in advocacy?
Okay, so hi everyone, it's lovely to be here. Stigma in a broad sense can mean a negative association with a particular characteristic a person might have. When we think about mental health stigma, it can be helpful to think about it as a problem of three parts. So if we talk about that for a moment, firstly, it can be understood as a problem of knowledge. So where people may have misinformation or a lack of awareness and understanding of what mental health is and the nature of mental health difficulties. And then that can lead to the second part, which is that stigma is a problem of attitude, where people may hold stereotyped ideas or prejudiced views associated to the third part, in that stigma can maybe be treated, for example, unfavorably because they have a mental health difficulty. So we're talking about discrimination there. And it can be helpful to understand it as those three parts, because that means we can tackle it at the different levels and hopefully be more effective in that way then.
Can I just ask you, Louise, you just broke up a tiny little bit there. So you were talking about knowledge firstly, and then a lack of knowledge or misinformation can lead to a negative attitude about something because there's not enough understanding there. And then what was the third aspect?
So the third part is that stigma, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Is that stigma can be a problem of behavior.
Okay.
In terms of how, for example, people being treated unfavorably because they have a mental health difficulty. So we're talking about discrimination there, which is a really important part of stigma to be aware of and to understand and to tackle. And I just finished off by saying, in case people missed that it's helpful to think about it in these different ways, because it means we can then address it at the different levels and hopefully be more effective then in our efforts to do so.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes people as well can think that sort of those attitudes or those behaviours can impact an individual who's being discriminated against in terms of whether it's on the basis of mental health or sexuality or whatever. But it also impacts the whole community, right? Can you explain to us a little bit how that works?
Yeah. First to say you are right, it does, as individuals, it can have a very negative impact. Firstly, it can delay us unnecessarily from getting help and support when we might need that, whether that's from a friend or family member or more formally. Another really important impact is that it can impact our choices then in how we participate in community life, for example. So if somebody has experienced discriminatory attitudes or stigmatizing behavior within their community previously, they're more likely to anticipate it happening again. So then that impacts the choices we can make, for example, in relation to work life, so talking to our manager if we need time off, for example. If we think about how it impacts community then, and community participation, we know that taking part in community life is so important for our mental health and well-being. That's, I think, a really increased understanding of that, and we haven't been able to do things periodically over the last couple of years. So whether that's being a member of a club, being a volunteer, taking part in leisure and social activities, all those things are both important for our mental health and well-being, but they're also important for mental health recovery when we're working on recovery from mental health difficulties. So if we are afraid of experiencing stigma and discrimination in the community, we're less likely to do those things. So the effect can be that our communities are less inclusive than they should be. Another important point, I guess, is that mental health is universal. So if our communities aren't inclusive or are not stigma-free spaces, then that can impact sort of the health of the community overall, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It very much does. And I think what you said about those three components is really useful. As you say, it helps you identify stigma and stigmatizing attitudes and beliefs and behaviors. And then also, if you're part of an organization within a community, it helps you to then think about, well, how are we going to address these, which is, we'll come on to later about some of the ways in which that can be done, but that's a really useful way to think about it. I think, now knowing that, so thanks for that explanation, Louise, I think now would be a good time to bring you in, James. So if you'd like to turn on your mic and your camera there, James, and we can have a little bit of a chat about your sort of personal experience, because I think sometimes, that is really helpful to hear about something as an idea and then how it sort of plays out in somebody's life and their life experience. So, James, can you tell us a little bit about, Louise mentioned there about sometimes how stigma, being aware of stigma in a community around an issue can be something that you internalize and can stop people from getting appropriate help or having conversations. Was that something, would that chime with your experience?
It would, yeah. James O'Connor's my name. I'm an ambassador with Sea Change. Yes, I would have myself personally felt that, I suppose I would have been self-stigmatizing in the sense that I would have, how would you say, swept under the carpet my own mental health difficulties from when I was younger. And a lot of what I felt was my own stuff. It wasn't actually there. It was something I built up in my own head from my own experience. That people would view you differently, or people would look at you differently if they knew that element of you. So, but in real life, when I did share my own story, my own background, the response has been, it's the total opposite.
Isn't that brilliant? That's such a positive thing to hear, because I think, when Louise was talking there, and as you mentioned it, for any issue in life, when there are beliefs that are sent to us by our family, by our community, by society, by media, whatever, we can't help but internalize those. And then, as you say, when you're in a dark place or experiencing something difficult, that just plays on a loop over and over again and does hold you back and delays you having those conversations. So can you tell us maybe a little bit, like you alluded to it there, that you actually had a very positive experience in your community when you did decide to discuss it with people or to seek help? Can you tell us a little bit about how that was, like how people were positive towards you?
When I shared my story, the response was overwhelming, and I became an ambassador then for Sea Change shortly after. And we locally, on a local level, set up a campaign called Tullamore Goes Green in support of Sea Change's Green Ribbon campaign. And like, it has grown year on year. And the amount of community organizations and even businesses and across the board that have been involved, or even that just people would stop me in the street and say, oh, and share their story maybe with me, and vice versa, and have a chat. But it has, what I have realized is that all that stuff that I thought in my head that people think that is actually, most of it, the vast majority of it was in my own head, was my own stuff. Whereas in real life, to support, and I'm only speaking from me in my area, but to support that is here and that is available, and that, like, it's overwhelming to see the amount of people that support it, you know.
It's funny, like St. Patrick's do a stigma and attitude survey most years to get a kind of a level on how attitudes are shifting around mental health issues. And I think it's that those statistics bear out what you're saying, that year on year, the statistics get more and more progressive in terms of the number of people who feel that they would be comfortable sharing that they have a mental health challenge, or equally people who would openly receive somebody. Like, I think their most recent statistics, 71% of people said that they would accept someone with a mental health difficulty as a close friend, absolutely, and give them support, which is growing all the time, and it bears out what your actual experience was. But I wonder, could you tell us, do you ever experience any negativity, or is it all a positive experience? Because I suppose it's important for us to shine a light on both, if that's the case, that it's been your experience of that.
I have experienced negative. I had one particular instance that sticks out in my mind, and I work for myself. I'm involved in a number of different businesses, and one of them in particular requires me to have life cover. And I went to a meeting one day about my life cover was due for renewal, or it needed to be increased because of what we were doing. And the guy that came to meet me, which was organised by the financial institution I was dealing with, but he was it wasn't the fact that he was, what's the word? The way he spoke to me, it like he just totally dismissed me. He nearly closed the folder and ran out the door. When he heard, like, I was answering the questions: have you any history of heart trouble in your family? You know, the usual questions. And have you had any mental health difficulties? Yes, I have. And next minute, it was nearly, what were they? And then I started to talk, and it was nearly literally closed the folder and run out the door type of job. And it was very, very, I remember at the time I was furious, because I would have, the people that would organize this other company to meet me, I would do a lot of business with them, and still do. And I thought that it wasn't the fact, if he couldn't give me life cover, that was fine, but it was the manner in which he dealt with it. And he more or less just closed the folder and nearly ran out the door. So I found that I actually made a complaint about it. It's a good number of years ago now, but I felt terrible after it, you know.
I'm not surprised. I think any of us would feel terrible after that, but I'm glad that you made a complaint, because I think sometimes what can happen in these instances is people are so taken aback and hurt by the stigma that they kind of think, oh, well, I probably shouldn't talk about this, or maybe I'm going to get another bad reaction. So it's great that you did go ahead and complain about it, because, there is no place for that. That's not an appropriate way to deal with somebody. And you can imagine if you had been talking to him about, I don't know, pick a physical illness like a heart condition or diabetes, he wouldn't have been closing the folder and trying to get out of there. And that is discriminatory, and that's not okay. So I'm glad that you made a complaint. Fair play to you.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, like there is a rate. Obviously risk, they're pricing risk. So, but if you're in the risk business, there's a rate for risk. So it should be no different. If it was a heart condition, you'd price the risk. And now it's not even an issue. It's that long ago. But I'm just saying that at the time it was actually, that was the worst type. The feeling that day was horrible.
Oh, I'm sure it was. But that's only
like I would have 98% positive, how would you say, positivity I was sharing my story, and 2% negativity. So like, to be fair, in anything you'd have that. So I think people's attitudes and minds are changing, in my own opinion.
No, that's great to hear. That's your experience. But I wonder, James, can you tell us a little bit as well? Like, I was struck there when you were saying that you find now that people come to you and share their experience with you of mental health difficulty, which just bears out the fact that the more open people are and the less stigmatizing views are, the more it empowers other people to talk about their experience. And you were telling me before about all of the good work that's gone on in Tullamore, around Tullamore Goes Green and with the Chamber of Commerce, that you now actually have a counselling facility in the town, right?
Yes, yeah, we do. Yeah, we've we're 2 years open in January.
That's great.
Accessible counsel in Tullamore, and it does exactly what it says in the tin. But it's a professional counselling service available to everybody, and that happened as a result of handing out ribbons in a shopping centre and a conversation that was had, and that's one of the real positives. Challenging to get off the ground and get set up and get funded and so on, but it is definitely one of the more positive. There's lots of people getting help. It's growing. Super organisation, very well supported in the community. Great board, great group of counsellors. You know, it's very, very good, very positive. But I would have, especially around, I could literally take the month off around the time of the green ribbon, and I could just walk through the town, and I'd say if not every person, I'd say most people would stop me to have a conversation. So I think that's a very good outcome, you know.
Oh, it absolutely is. It absolutely is, like something that's so tangible, you know, that people, and really practical. It's a brilliant initiative, and it's so great that it's resulted in that. And you'll never really be able to quantify the full positive impact of that, because even just, you know, it's the ripple effect of a positive impact on one person's life, and then that ripples out through their circle and family and community and all the rest of it.
Yeah,
so Jane,
sorry. No, you go ahead.
No, please go ahead. No, you're the person we want to hear talking, not me.
I suppose I get the statistics on the centre. I'm directly involved with the centre, but an interesting statistic is that when the centre opened first, most referrals were coming from GPs,
Right.
And most referrals now, the vast majority of referrals now are coming from clients, which means they're saying, which shows there's a tangible thing that you can see. So I don't know, Mary's down in the centre, and her friend, I don't know, Irene, for example, she's chatting and she says, "Oh, I was down in that place," rather than a GP. So them two women spoke to each other, and one referred the other, and they went and got a bit of help they needed. But there's a reducing stigma, whereas if you moved that back 10 years ago in Ireland, and 10 years isn't a long time,
No.
that conversation wouldn't be shared between them two women. I just made up their names, but that conversation wouldn't be shared, and it'd be almost nearly, "Don't talk about that, Jenny. No, Jenny, don't. Just keep that in this house," you know.
Yeah. Oh,
So
listen,
there's a positive.
That is so positive, James, and it's great to hear. It's great to hear those stories, and it's such a brilliant statistic that, you know, the referrals that were coming through GPs, which is a perfectly fine way to access help if you need to, but to think that now it's embedded in the community, that people are just talking about it and sharing it with each other, that's really, really positive. And I hope that you get a personal sense of satisfaction around that you kind of were the domino that set a lot of this off.
Yeah, I actually enjoy to see people getting help. You know, it's good. But it's not that I didn't do it on my own or anything. It was huge help, like Lisa and Dib. We have a great board and great clinical supervisors, and the community on a whole have been excellent. Like, there's a guy just after raising, his son actually died in a traffic accident, but he's after raising 22 grand this month for the centre. Like, do you know, people see the benefit of it, you know, so it's very good, you know.
No, that's fantastic, and it's great to hear those positive stories and how things are shifting in such a practical way. James, I'm going to bring Louise back in for a second. We'll chat to you again, James, for questions at the end, if that's okay. But for the moment, thanks so much for your contribution. It's great to hear that, so thanks for that. Louise, I want to talk to you. So that was brilliant to hear from James in a practical sense, in just one town in Ireland, what's happening and the positive impact of that and how it ripples through. And I know Stigma, I alluded to there, that Stigma and Attitude survey that St. Patrick's do from time to time to just kind of gauge that progression and try and sort of quantify it. And really, St. Patrick's take that whole idea of stigma and stigma reduction really seriously. And it sort of culminated in the No Stigma campaign that kicked off last year, I want to say. But to be perfectly honest, what is time in terms of the pandemic? But I'm pretty sure it was last year, but maybe it was 2019. But could you talk to us a little bit about the No Stigma campaign, like what motivated it and how you decided to put it together in the way you did?
Yeah, so as you say, St. Patrick's mental health services would be very committed to contributing to national efforts alongside organisations like See Change to reduce stigma and discrimination. So we do different things, and the No Stigma campaign was sort of a new approach we were trying to contribute to those efforts. So what No Stigma is about thinking about stigma in a slightly different way, by asking people to consider what life without mental health stigma and discrimination would look like. So James gave some lovely examples there of the positive domino effect of telling his story and how it created open conversations and a more inclusive community. So the No Stigma campaign is really asking, like, what if that was the norm? So I think I have some images here I'm going to try and share to give people a flavor of it. So we would have displayed these images. Sorry, just bear with me a second. We would have displayed these images in public spaces during the campaign, and we continue to share them via social media. Sorry, that's kind of a bit funny, but hopefully you can get a flavor of it there. We also have a website where people can learn more about what mental health is, but also consider some of the ways that life without stigma might grow in our homes, in our work environments, and in our communities, importantly. So there's some images there, and we also invite people to share their thoughts and experiences on what life without stigma might mean to them. And then more recently this year, we've been able to collaborate with Shelburne on sort of a focus No Stigma in the Community project, by trying to increase openness and discussion, and I guess helping Shelburne to manifest their really important ethos of promoting mental health in the community by signalling that it's a stigma-free space. And really one of the things, I suppose, I know it's difficult when people say one of the positive things that came out of the pandemic, but there is an argument that there's a far greater awareness of the importance of mental health in daily life and the idea of it being universal, and that sense of all of us benefiting when we come together to change things for the positive. So there's more information at nostigma.ie if people are interested in it and want to learn more. And it's really great to have these conversations today, because we know stigma is reducing year on year, and James's ratio there of positive versus negative experiences is really good as well to hear that. But there is more to do. So it's really great to have these conversations, to learn from people's personal experiences and figure out what else we can do to achieve life without stigma.
No, it's great. And I'm interested to know, like, have you had like interesting feedback on the campaign? Like, have you heard some, I mean, we heard, as you alluded to there, some nice stories from James and his experience. Have you heard others from different aspects of the wider community of people that have engaged with the campaign and maybe put up the posters or, you know, connected in different ways?
Yeah, absolutely. And people can see some of the comments people have shared on the website as well. So quite specific examples of positive experiences in workplace. So for example, where people may have needed to approach their line manager about returning to work after a mental health difficulty and really receiving the response that they should receive, which is an accommodating one and an understanding one and a non-discriminatory one. Also some young people sharing that they feel they have grown up in a stigma-free environment, which is really positive, that there is maybe generational shift, hopefully, and that, you know, hopefully younger people coming through won't even know what the word stigma means. So yeah, there's been some really positive thoughts and ideas shared, and hopefully we'll continue to garner some energy for us through conversations like this.
Oh, absolutely. And it's great to hear that. It's great to hear that there's been so much positive feedback. And I think sometimes because the idea of stigma is such a negative one, and because as human beings, our brains are programmed to kind of scan and pick up more negative, threatening things than positive ones necessarily, we can sometimes get the perception wrong of how prevalent any one thing is over the other. So it's nice to have the evidence that shows it, that says, no, this is shifting, this is moving. But I guess the important thing is, like everything, you can't get complacent, and we have to keep moving it along. So Louise, I'm going to ask you to come back again a little bit later on. We're going to talk about a life free from discrimination and what our rights are around this issue. But for now, I'd like to invite Jason to join me. So this is Jason Mcginnis, who's the coordinator of Shelbourne Football Club's education programme. And obviously one of the organisations that Louise just mentioned involved in the No Stigma campaign is Shelbourne Football Club. And if you are a Shells fan or you watch any other League of Ireland matches and your team are playing Shells, you'll see the patch that they wear on their home and away jerseys, male teams, female teams. They have the No Stigma logo on their jerseys, which is great because it's a really visible sign of the club's allyship around this issue, which is great. But Jason, you coordinate these education programs in Shelbourne, and you know it's a slightly different angle in that we're not really talking in this instance about obvious instances of stigma. It's more about the work in the community and around education that you do to foster that sort of safe place to land for people. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a sec, but I know, can you just give us a sense of, I think sometimes people, when they think about mental health and football, they think about it from the perspective of performance psychology, like how do I score more goals? How do I run faster? How can I motivate myself to perform? But you were telling me about an interesting angle that I think people don't often think about, is that professional sports and any elite sport, very few people get to do it. And there's a lot of people who try and don't get there. And what's your experience of yourself or dealing with people where that has happened and the impact that can have on people's mental health?
Hey, Jan. Yeah, I have a lot of experience in this type of area. I've worked as a coordinator for the FEI development program over the years. And these courses were originally set up for people that came back from England, and you spoke about not making it. Like a lot of football players, both men and women, don't reach the highs that we see in the Premiership every day. So where do these people end up? I mean, it's a great high for them going to England, but coming back when they're told you're not quite up to the standard or we're going to go a different way. I've seen over the past, from my job in the FEI, that these young people are coming home and they're not in a good place because their confidence is in their boots. They've been told, listen, your dream is over. And now it's a sudden realization of, oh my God, what do I do from here? I mean, I had the big party with all my friends and family to say I'm going away to play for Celtic or Man United or whatever, but 2 years later down the line, they're coming home with no education and confidence. They probably don't want to play football again. So I don't think people realise the impact that sudden low would have on a football player. So what the courses we did was we kind of got them in onto the courses and helped them get educated, rebuild their careers, and that had a positive effect on their lives and people around them. So, and just going back to what Louise said earlier on about the community becoming more inclusive, that ties in my new role at Shelbourne. And Shelbourne, we understand our role within the community. I mean, sadly, 2 Shelbourne supporters committed suicide back in 2018. And that kind of kickstarted the whole idea about Shelbourne. And what can we do more to help people? Like Shelbourne, it's a fantastic club with good people in around the club, and they understand their place in society and the community. So what we do now is we've set up this campaign. We've also set up this course, and we run it from Swords out in Fingal. And it just Shelbourne are trying to create an openness to those involved. They have over 400 young youth players and girls and boys in their academy. And Shelbourne are with these people every step of the way. And they set up this new course and help get people educated. And we found that education and taking part can have a positive impact on people's mental health. So that's the whole idea of Shelbourne. Are not just, yes, it's a football club, but they want to help people in around the club and in their community and try and do what they can.
Yeah, and I think, you know, what you said there is so true, that oftentimes when people talk about physical exercise or fitness as part of a mental health conversation, it's around the idea of like recovery or it's part of getting better. But actually, as Louise outlined at the very beginning, the idea of being in a community and connecting with people and building relationships is so core to keeping well mentally, to having, you know, that sense of connection and belonging in a community is really part of really who we are as human beings. So it's absolutely vital. And I think as well, it's interesting you mentioned there about those 2 supporters who sadly died by suicide. So often, I think in communities, initiatives, you know, young people in particular, mental health, the conversation can begin around something so negative as that. Like it's, you know, and that's probably more indicative of how things would have happened in the past. Whereas to have initiatives that are positive and where conversations around mental health are just happening, they don't need a tragic event to spark them. It's just a general, you know, a more positive sort of approach within the community is great. But I wonder, could you, like when you're talking about these players that come home and the programs that you do, Jason, like, have you noticed in your career from when you started playing football to now, is there more of an openness generally? Like, have you noticed a shift in people's willingness and openness in talking about these topics?
Most definitely. It's a tough environment, professional football. And I'm fortunate enough to have had a long career. I started 18 years ago in it, and there was no talk of it at all. But even you mentioned there about Shelbourne having these logos on their jersey, it just makes it more aware to people that it is okay to talk about it, talk about things. If you're not feeling great, go and speak to somebody. And you see, if you go on Shelbourne's website, there's opportunities there for you to take names and numbers, and if you're not feeling so great, you can get access to help. It's becoming more and more prevalent in society, and it's only a good thing. And as I mentioned, I keep going back, football, like, it's a great tool where we all love football, we all love sport, and having that feeling of participation, bringing people into an environment where we can all, you know, have a sense of belonging and purpose. I think it's a great initiative from Shelbourne, and one I'm really excited to be a part of. And yeah, going back to what you mentioned earlier on, more and more people can see the logos. If you go to a game of Shelbourne, you'd see it around the place. So it's becoming more and more prevalent around the game.
It connects back to what James was saying earlier as well, about that idea that when you're not feeling great or you are having a problem and you internalize whatever messages you're getting in your wider community, and if you're getting visible vocal messages from clubs like Shelbourne, from other organizations saying, listen, this is just part of life, it's grand, you can talk to us about it, we're not going to think of you differently, we're here to support you, it's so positive, you know. But I wonder, you were telling me, in addition, the course that you mostly run at the minute is the business development plan, which is about people's general professional development and trying to maybe transition from being a sports person or whatever into working in the area of sport or fitness or whatever. But you're also thinking about doing a wellness class on a Wednesday for the community, right?
Yes, it's a brand new course, and myself and my colleague Paul Dowdy, he's been running these type of courses for a long time as well. We're currently developing the timetable. As I said, it's a new course. It's the first of its kind in the country, so it's up to us to create the content and stuff. And it was mainly Paul's idea. He brought it up and says, let's do a Wellness Wednesday. And we got speaking about it because we do a soccer coaching module where you'll get the physical activity from that, which is good, which helps. But we're also going to have on the timetable on a Wednesday, just for 45 minutes, a Wellness Wednesday, where we sit down, slow down, gather our thoughts and think about the other things in life. It's not all about just the physical activities, but we've got to take care of our mental health as well. So we're going to maybe get some professionals in on the Wednesday, have a chat with some of our young learners and listen to the ripple effect that can have as well. And might knock onto people's families. We don't know what's going on behind closed doors. So if we can impact one or two people, it'd be hugely successful for myself and Paul on this course. And that all comes back to the football, doesn't it? It comes back to football as the hook. Now we're educating people. Now we're having an impact on people's lives. It might have an impact on people's families. And it's great. As I said, I go back to what we said earlier on. Shelbourne understands its place within the community because, as I said, football, it's usually participated throughout the world and Ireland. So if we can help in any way, we most certainly will. And we're excited about our new course and trying to impact young people's lives going forward as much as we can.
It's interesting, like I was thinking when we were chatting yesterday and when we were getting ready for this webinar, I don't know if you saw Keith Earls on the Late Late Show last Friday night, but Keith is obviously an Irish rugby international, plays for Munster, amazing career, like fantastic athlete. And he was talking about the fact that he was recently diagnosed with bipolar 2 mood disorder. And it was really interesting watching that interview and reading about it in the newspaper, him talking about his own journey around the stigma of it, in saying, like, I felt embarrassed. I did not want to talk about this. The first person I spoke to about it was the GP for the team years after dealing with it, you know, and it's interesting to think that was that experience all those years ago. And now, you know, organizations like the FAI, clubs like Shelbourne are just taking this so much more seriously, that from the top elite level down to just people in the community who have a passing interest in sport but just happen to live within a shout of the stadium. It's so positive that shift is happening.
Yeah, going back to some of my own experiences, as I said, I had a long career. There's always that worry throughout your career. What am I going to do when this day stops, when I stop, when I can't play football? It's such a huge change to your life and your family's life, because every day you know where you're at, you're training, you're getting yourself ready for training, you're getting yourself ready for games. But then all of a sudden, it's, oh, what do I do from here now? And I've seen over the past where some professionals, and they don't really know how to deal with that. And that's been having really negative effect on their life. So back to the course we kind of do, you know, it's good to start putting things in place. I mean, we target some of the young players at Shelbourne, men and women's team, who'll help getting them educated, putting blocks in place. And, you know, for when that day does come around, like, you're not going to be playing football anymore, that it's a seamless transition. It's not, oh my God, my whole life has been turned upside down, and the negative effects that will have on you. So I totally understand, right? You spoke about the rugby player there. He's probably used to his life being gone by timetable. I'm training Monday. This is what I eat. This is what I don't do. I'm told where to be. Now he's out. He's out of that bubble. And how do you deal with it?
Yeah, no. And I mean, I think that has relevance for everybody, even outside of sports, like people who have worked a job their whole lives and they're retiring, or people who have become parents, or anyone that has a shift in their identity or what their life was, and there's a massive change. That's hard. Like, change is really hard for people. It inevitably is ultimately positive, but it's really hard to navigate. And it's important that we talk about the fact that you can expect to have a bit of a mental health wobble around things like that. It's big stuff, you know. It's natural that you would feel a bit potentially struggling around it, you know. I'm just conscious here of the time, and that's great, Jason. Like, I'm honestly, all I want to happen now is that basically you just go around all the football clubs in the country, go and check this out, do this, here's our template, go and do it.
Yeah,
Can you
but
imagine if it was happening countrywide? It'd be amazing.
Fortunate enough, a lot of League of Ireland clubs are going to get the green light to run such courses the way we have. And
Brilliant.
listen, it's a great idea. It's having a positive effect on young people's lives. Everyone can apply for these type of courses, and as I said, education is a great tool. It has a good impact on people's lives, and that's what we're here to do with Shelbourne, help people in the community as much as we can. And you know,
this is it. And it'll give us a lift while we're waiting for Stephen Kenny to just bed in and get us to the next World Cup. It'll just keep us going. All right, Jason, I'm going to call you back for questions and answers in a little bit of a while, but I just want to bring Louise back in for a sec. Louise, can you just join us there? Again, sorry, I'm calling on you all the time, but you're a fountain of knowledge about this topic. And I'm conscious that we've heard great positive stories from James, from Jason about things that are happening in the community. Mm-hmm. And we know from the evidence that this is a progression that's happening all over the place. But I'm conscious that, you know, knowledge is power. It's important for people to know, what are my rights in this area? Because we all are entitled to live a discrimination-free life, every one of us. That is our right as human beings. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the protections that exist here in Ireland for us around this issue?
Absolutely, it's a great question. Just before I do that, just to say, I am conscious that some of the topics we can touch on in our conversation can, you know, be sensitive, and I'm conscious that people might have different responses who are listening. So just if anybody does want more information about mental health supports available, we've just shared a few links in the chat box. And just another plug for Shelbourne as well. I don't think Jason mentioned there, but they also have a really impressive, in terms of inclusive community activity, they have a really impressive collaboration with the Alzheimer's Society and reminiscence around football memories and things like that. I hope I'm describing it well, but just another plug for all the great work Shelbourne are doing to be inclusive across the lifespan, and, you know, being aware of mental health in later life as well. So sorry, to come back then to the rights issue. So you're absolutely right in terms of all of us of discrimination being a rights issue. And one thing to note is that one of the main principles underpinning all human rights is that they should be enjoyed by everyone without discrimination. So non-discrimination is one of the fundamental underpinning principles for human rights. In terms of protections then from discrimination, specifically in Ireland, the two main laws that protect us from discrimination are the Employment Equality Acts and the Equal Status Acts. And I know someone has just shared, thanks very much there, a link to more information on both of those acts. To summarise, the Employment Equality Acts is concerned with prohibiting discrimination in the workplace. And the Equal Status Act is concerned with prohibiting discrimination when we're using goods and services. So a good example earlier was James's really unpleasant interaction with the insurance salesperson. So under these laws, we're protected from discrimination under different grounds, so specific different grounds like gender, etc. Disability is one of those grounds, and mental health difficulties are considered as part of that ground. So it's under on that basis that we're protected from discrimination. But another part of it is something called reasonable accommodations. So it's not just about prohibiting discrimination, it's about trying to create more inclusive and equal societies within those laws. So what reasonable accommodation is, for anyone who's unfamiliar, it's basically adjustments that employers or service providers have to make, or must or should make, to accommodate any needs of people with disabilities. So when we think about if we have a mental health difficulty and we think about the workplace, an accommodation there might be that we need a change to our routine or our work schedule, or we need time off to attend mental health appointments. So there mightn't be major changes. So as I mentioned, there's lots more information about these rights if you think you might have been discriminated against, or you just want to know more about them. and delve into it a bit more, Your Rights service that the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission has lots of information. They also have a number you can call. And also, if you've experienced incidents of discrimination, whether it's with insurance people or public services or trying to join a club or whatever it might be, and you feel you've been discriminated against, there is actually a consultation happening at the moment. So those laws that protect us from discrimination are being reviewed, and they're looking at ways to try and strengthen them at the moment. And they're asking the public for opinions on that, they being the government. So that's running until November 29th. Just looking over there, I have it written on the wall. And there's a link as well to that if people want to have their say and share their view on ways you feel the legal side of things can help us work more towards stigma-free communities.
That's great. That's really great, and great that consultation is happening for anybody watching who'd like to feed into it. I'm conscious there, like we heard about some of the work that James does in his community and the people in his community around him, and also obviously from Jason about the great work that's happening in Shelburne. And I'm just wondering, Louise, like for individuals, who maybe don't have an organizational structure behind them, like what are some of the ways that we can be more vocal, more visible allies for people in our community who may just feel apprehensive about being open about any mental health challenges that they're having?
So I think I keep referring back to what James said. I'm basically stealing all James's ideas of James' ripple effect, and how one person's actions can create a domino effect, which opens up conversations. So all the work Sea Change do in having ambassadors share their stories of experiencing mental health difficulties and recovery is really positive. But similarly, how we all talk about mental health in daily life is important. So firstly, I would suggest that people, can educate themselves about what mental health actually means and understanding more about what mental health difficulties are. So not just necessarily talking about if you've experienced mental health difficulties, but also conversations about, what you do to look after your mental health in daily life. So it's that sense of recognizing mental health as universal and normalizing conversations about mental health in all its complexities and dimensions. Sharing and contributing and supporting campaigns like the Green Ribbon is also another really helpful way. So if you're a business owner, having the Green Ribbons available for sale or on display is a signifier, to people using your services that you're supportive of reducing stigma. And I do think there's a really increased willingness and openness in society, probably from our experiences collectively in the pandemic, to really leave stigma behind. So it is a positive time to be having this conversation, I think. We did a series of blogs on mental health topics as part of our collaboration with Shelburne. And the most popular topic that people gave feedback that they wanted information on was how to support a friend or family member that might be having experiencing mental health difficulties. So I think that's a real signifier that people want to know what they can do. And one last thing is probably thinking about the language we use as well when we're talking about mental health difficulties. And just those things that people are probably more aware of now than 5 years ago, and not using labels or derogatory terminology and things like that when we're talking about mental health difficulties. And I know there's lots of good resources as well as on the No Stigma website, on the Sea Change website as well, about different topics and how to topics like that and how to make contributions yourself.
No, that's true. There's great resources up there for people. I'm just looking at the time, and I just want to bring everybody back in just to answer a few questions if you can. We've had people in touch, all very impressed with all of your initiatives and basically wanted to know how they can do the same. And James, everybody is really impressed by what's going on in Tullamore and wondering how they can replicate that in their own communities. And have you any sort of advice to people maybe around how they could start something in their community, or maybe highlight the work that's happening in Tullamore?
Yeah, well, I suppose I'll give you just a brief on how we got to where we are now. basically the first thing we done was we, through the Chamber of Commerce, which I'm involved in myself, but we accessed into the businesses. And what we found was that if you had one hairdresser, for example, do a green window display with green ribbons and had a box of them on the counter, well, then every hairdresser wanted one. So it was the same. No, but you asked the question, but this is literally how it worked. And the same with the factories. Like we'd have good employers here, FDI companies and stuff like that. But they had, like, we've pictures there of 200 people standing out holding ribbons and showing support for the green ribbon. And once one does it in their group, and they'd have groups, and then they do it the same with the football clubs, the GAA clubs. You know, it just grew from there. But what I found was you'll pick up a few key individuals along the way. So there's people that you might necessarily know that want to help you, but you'll pick up the key skills you need to deliver it year on year. And they'll actually be ringing you saying, oh, when's the green ribbon on? I have such and such an idea. So it actually, it grows legs. So that's my, in the simplest form, that's my advice. Start off with a chamber of commerce or a business or a community group. Do one thing, do it well, then expand out from there. But like, I think the difference in numbers between, we had in 2018, we had 170 businesses, 2019, we 250.
Wow.
So like it's, and each business was giving out ribbons, and each business, not every business, but we're doing window displays, and they were doing, like, we businesses this year that got cupcakes made, and like they had staff wearing green jumpers, and like it snowballs, you know. So that's my.
No, I mean, I think that's great advice. And I know I was laughing there when you're saying about the hairdressers getting one up on each other, but it's more like that's what leadership looks like, is one person does it and other people follow. And that's the way we're programmed, you know, and it just takes one or two people in the community to step up and to lead, and everyone else is like, oh yeah, brilliant, I never even thought about doing that. That's a great idea. So I think that's brilliant advice to people. And the great thing about it is it feels very accessible. Like, it's not too scary to think, well, I'm going to approach the Chamber of Commerce and I might approach one business. You know, you can start that happening and then see, as you say, where the snowball goes. Jason, unsurprisingly, people also want to know about setting up those kind of wellbeing initiatives in their clubs. Now, I know the education program that you are running is an initiative of the FAI, and there's funding there through that. But is that for all clubs? Like, if you were in a small, you know, maybe small town-based club or a rural club, is that something that you can also get funding from the FAI for, do you know?
No, we're actually funded by the ETB, which is the Education Training Board.
Sorry, that's
and,
right, it's not the
at
FAI.
the moment, there's only yourselves, Shelbourne and Drogheda have set them up, so it's in its infancy. I'm sure there'll be more of them around the country setting up with League of Ireland clubs, but at the moment, no. Some small, so-called smaller clubs haven't set up any of these initiatives because they're heavily backed by the ETB, and it costs a lot of money to run these type of courses because we get a lot of learners on board and stuff like that. So as I said, it's in its infancy, and hopefully it'll
roll out
from there. Yeah.
From your experience of working on them, Jason, and trying to, like, I'm sure there are some people who are just so enthusiastic and want to get involved, but I'm sure there's other people where it's a little bit like pulling teeth, like, you know, it'll be good for them, but they're maybe a bit reticent about getting involved. You know, have you any advice to people about how to maybe just gently, or maybe not so gently, encourage people to get involved in these initiatives?
Yeah, we're still recruiting at the moment, and we have found some resistance from people. They're not too sure. They'd say education is not for me, or I didn't have a pleasant experience at school. These are some of the feedback we're getting. But if you think about it, if you come on, I found when lads come on these and girls come on these courses, they realise it's nothing like school. It's a fun environment where they've a lot of like-minded people coming on board. who are interested in sports. And as I said, I was fortunate enough to have been involved in these type of initiatives over the last 5 or 6 years. And we get learners coming on from quite tough backgrounds who have no interest in education. But by the end of the year, when they're finished, they've got their qualifications, and they're on board, they're asking about college, how can they go on to further education. We've seen some people set up their own businesses, whether it's in gym instruction, and go on to get scholarships in America. So as I said, football is a great hook. It gets people in, a bit of curiosity there, but
yeah,
once you come on, there's endless possibilities and opportunities to come involved. It's not, as I said, it's a good environment where we've seen people come on and make friends, which is important, and create relationships with other people.
Jason, there's always people talk about, when they talk about sports, about good man management, right? And I'm just wondering what, that sounds to me like good man management, getting people into these courses.
Yeah.
And I'm just here scrolling through the questions and wondering, for people who maybe aren't as skilled at that or haven't had practice doing that, have you maybe 1 or 2 tips that yourself and Paul, who you mentioned that you work with, use to help to create that culture or that environment where people feel safe enough to revisit something that was difficult for them in the past, like education, for example?
Yeah, we have people signing our course up to 34 years of age. It's open to everybody. And the first question they'll say is, it's a long time since I studied. You'd be surprised how quickly you pick it back up. And as I said, myself and Paul has a lot of experience tutoring and delivering on these courses. And we're there to help you get over them. We're not here to, stop you from getting education. Education for everybody. If you have certain needs, that's my job, to try and help you and facilitate you get over the line with whatever needs you have. So no matter if you haven't studied in 20 years, that's no problem. As I said, education, it's for everybody. It's enjoyable, and come on board and it'll open up all types of doors for you, whether it's for the qualifications or whether it's the social aspect where that's the beauty of it as well.
I'm going to mix my sporting metaphors, but it sounds like you're really in people's corner. Like you're the person in the corner, literally cheering them on if they are feeling going, I'm here for you. Like, I'll be there. I'll support you all the way, which is great.
As I said, I was a football player for a long time myself, and I was solely focused on football. But I do understand the importance of education. Now, I went back to do other courses myself over the years. But as I said, we're here to help you get over the line. We want to see people go on and achieve good things in their lives. And as we keep going back to, I know we mentioned it a couple of times about the ripple effect that these type of courses have in the community. Like, all the young people that come on our courses will be wearing the Shelbourne branded tracksuits, and they're going into their community with the Shelbourne. That might catch the attention of some young person saying, what's this guy doing? Maybe I can follow in his footsteps, rather than they're hanging around corners or whatever they're doing at weekends. Now they're seen as a positive role model in the community. And that's the whole idea behind these courses. So as I said, I keep going back, education for everybody. I'm not the brightest.
I'm going to be signed up to a course by the end of this. You're really selling it. James, I just want to come back to ask you a question. Where is it here? About the pandemic. And I'm just wondering, like Louise had mentioned earlier, this idea that, there seemed to be more of a sense of community among people, realizing, God, this is hard, like this is difficult. But I'm just wondering, from your perspective and how embedded you are in the community in this area, have you felt that people, I don't know, just got a new awareness of mental health issues due to the experience that we all shared around the pandemic?
Yeah, we found, I suppose, I can give you some numbers. I don't know them off the top of my head, but I know the gist of them. Like, for example, like, I thought people were far more willing to look for help during the pandemic. We were one of the few services. We were actually the first service locally to open back up for face-to-face counselling in the centre. But prior to that, we had been doing Zoom. But what we found was that people that necessarily, I won't say never had a problem before in their lives, is the wrong way to say it, but we say people that all of a sudden were stuck in a rut because of the situation they were in. They're actually willing to go and get a few counselling sessions and get themselves back and on track. Dimna calls it brief therapy. but like a lot of people availed of that service, and like they were more open, like to I suppose, how would I say it? They were, when the problem started, they went and got help straight away, rather than let it fester and build up into something else. They actually were willing to go out and try and solve it instantly, more or less. Does that answer the question? Or?
It absolutely does. And I think it's a really good point, because that's something that I haven't heard many people say, but it's really interesting that idea that I think in the past, as you said yourself with your own situation, you know, you were slow to seek help or to talk to people about it because of the internalized stigma around it. But now we've got to a point where people, the moment they know that something is up, they're willing to act on it, not sit on it, not let it fester, not let it get worse. That's so positive. Like, I mean, it is 12:01, so I've completely gone over time, as is standard when it comes to me. But I think it's a very positive note to end on, that the culture that we're creating now and the barriers that we're breaking down around these topics is facilitating people getting help with their problems sooner. And that can only be a positive thing, which is great. Louise, I'm conscious I didn't ask you any questions, mostly because you supplied those links in the chat as we were talking, so I think people have access to those links. But is there anything you want to add before we wrap up?
I think James spoke to it really well there, and it kind of comes back to what I was saying at the beginning, that, you know, stigma is completely unnecessary. It's an unnecessary barrier. There's lots of other complexities, I know, in terms of access and social determinants, etc. But stigma is something that's very unnecessary, and that we as a community can do something about. So it's really positive and heartening to hear that from James's observations, that unnecessary delay in reaching out for support and help wasn't happening as much, because that can only be a good thing if we're removing barriers to get help and support.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Louise, James, Jason, thanks so much. I am now a Shelburne fan, apparently. It's unlikely for somebody from the middle of nowhere in Meath, but there you go. James, best of luck with everything in Tullamore and the next Green Ribbon campaign. Thanks for your time. And Louise, thanks to you. And for any of you that have logged on, thanks guys. If you've enjoyed this, feel free to share the link. It'll be on YouTube at St. Pat at walkinmyshoes.ie/WIMS live. You can get the link and share it with other people if you think they'd be interested. Thanks for your time. Goodbye.